This video features the use of dangerous tools, hazardous chemicals and sharp knives. Viewer discretion is advised.
Firstly, I want to give a huge thank you to the positive reception for the Mad Bomber recreation. I'm extremely grateful for all of the feedback, both positive and constructive. This video was a lot of fun to make and it was great to have some help on this one too. This random man walked into my studio and started helping out on the set. I did confront him, but he didn't back down. He seemed to know what he was doing though, so I let him crack on. Turns out he has a YouTube channel too, Thomas the Tank Man 111. And he's also just released a new song. You can find links to both in the description. For those who don't know, the Mad Bomber is a Thomas the Tank Engine video created by Leokim Video in the early 2000s. I remember absolutely adoring this video when I was younger. You can find a link to the original Mad Bomber video in the description below. To start, James and I set to work building the yard set. The majority of the surface is MDF board, but this section at the end was made from plasterboard. This meant I could draw around the turntable and cut a hole for it to sit in. It didn't go to plan immediately, but we got there in the end. We used wooden beams to give some buildings a little bit more height, and we hid these with retaining walls. We then continued to add a variety of tracks to build up the yard. We didn't necessarily have a set plan, we just put down tracks and kept what we thought looked good. The usual sky I use is made of polyester, which can be washed, steamed and stretched. The grey sky, however, is a large card printout, which over time has become quite creased and torn. In time, I'd like to replace it, but my budget can't quite stretch there at the moment. So we hung this using clamps at the top. I then nailed in the tracks before adding the ballast. The trackside lights were achieved by wiring the lamps to battery packs underneath the table. I tend to use Woodland Scenic's ballast. I prefer a much darker shade though, so I add a small amount of black weathering powder and give it a good shake. It does make it dustier, so you need to be more attentive when cleaning the tracks, but but I love the look it gives. We then tested Thomas to make sure the tracks were cleaned and ready. We then gave the table a little clear out as we'd accumulated a lot of stuff while building. That way we'd have a clearer workspace for filming. We then set up our lights to give that atmospheric stormy night look. We also had an extra bright light which would be flashed intermittently for the lightning effect. The mist was achieved by using a fog machine, a tube, and then a very cold damp cloth at the end to cool down the mist and let it settle on the set. We kept putting this cloth back in the fridge when not in use, as the fog would heat it up. We then got to work filming the short. Some shots required creative wiring, as we didn't have quite enough wire to stretch to the turntable. There is sometimes quite a process to get the frame looking exactly as we want it, but we get there eventually. We had to move the table round to get various different angles so that the sky was always at the back. The lights then also had to be moved to keep consistent lighting throughout. Points are always a pain, as ballast gets stuck in the gaps and dust prevents the metal switches from touching. We always get it cleaned in the end though. The lights in Andy's shed were interesting. We literally just stuffed some fairy lights at the back to illuminate the shed. Although Thomas is DCC, for some odd reason I forgot to wire his lamps, or perhaps was rushing. This meant I needed to power his lamps using a battery pack. This meant we had to be clever with the camera angles so you couldn't see the battery pack. While the sparks were a digital effect, the explosions were real. I won't go into the details of how I made these for safety reason, but I will share the fact that Andy was not in his shed at the time of the explosion. I digitally composited him in using a variety of different stills of Andy with progressively brighter lighting until he disappeared entirely. And there we go. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this behind the scenes look into the Mad Bomber recreation. Please let me know what you'd like to see next.